All right, this one is by Excel Accounting, and I've called it Excel Accounting and the Rebel Shadow.
Those two don't go together.
I know, yeah, Microsoft's new edition. Excel Accounting with a Rebel Shadow.
Yep.
This was back in the 70s, and my mother used to put curlers in my hair before bed, so it definitely was back in the 70s. I was sitting up in bed playing with my shadow. I had noticed that if I turned my head just right, I could see light through the hollow core of some of the larger curlers, and I thought that was neat. The excitement of a child.
Yeah. Yes.
Easily entertained, but not for long. Suddenly, my shadow turned its head to look at me. I was terrified. Shadows are not supposed to move by themselves. They're supposed to do what you do. In case you were wondering, if you've never seen a shadow before, that's how they operate. It's usually what you do, replicated on the ground or whatever surface the light is coming from.
Well, that kind of makes sense. Is that science?
It is. Yeah, you're welcome. I thought you'd enjoy that. I laid down quickly, reasoning that my shadow, which was currently doing what it wanted, would have to lay down too, and at least then I wouldn't be able to see it looking at me. But it didn't lay down. Instead, it stepped off the wall, reached out, and touched me, like the song, and spoke in this really high-pitched voice that sounded wrong. Everything so far in this story sounds wrong, so it makes sense that the voice would also match that sentiment. This was too much for me. I screamed and heard my mom hurrying down the hall. The shadow looked startled and quickly moved back to the wall and laid down. The movements were also wrong. The body didn't bend like mine. The shadow didn't sit and lay down like I did, but moved in one flat line. I've tried picturing that, and I don't really fully understand it, but it does sound creepy.
Yeah.
My mother told me it had been a dream, but it wasn't. I hadn't even been sleeping yet. Thankfully, I never saw that shadow again.
But that shadow saw them.
I know, I'm like, you never saw your shadow again? But probably just not acting aloof.
Not that particular demonic shadow.
Exactly. That one could hit the bricks. There have been other strange occurrences. My keys missing for months and finally showing up laying on top of the contact case I had just used the night before. I was the only one at home that night. My kids were at the lake with their grandparents. My basement door rattling violently for about 8 to 10 seconds while I just stood there and staring at it thinking, what the F? This kind of stuff only happens on TV. I didn't check out what was behind the door until it stopped moving, and of course, nothing was there, nor was I able to recreate it. When my youngest, who absolutely hated people talking about him, died, at the celebration of life, I asked for the microphone system to be set up. They couldn't get the microphone to work, so thinking something was wrong with it, they went home to get another one. It too didn't work. We just relayed our stories without it. After the celebration, we cleaned up and went home. About 10 that night, I got a text, and it was the lady who rented the hall beside herself saying she couldn't understand it, but she'd gone back to figure out why the microphones weren't working because the next day's renters wanted it, and both worked perfectly. I always figured it was my kid. Later, I asked for a sign from my kid that he was around. I was going to type random songs into Google and open the first video. It was, quote, "Until I See You Again," released 3 years ago to the day before my son died. About a month later, I did the same, this time with the intent of opening the third video, same song again. One night, I got up to go to the washroom, walked by the computer, and it fired up. Came back, walked by my cell phone, and it too fired up. Weird. I don't really get the last one, but I mean, I guess technology's weird, right? But
well, it's definitely weird when you're back in the 70s and you see a shadow like that, and then you're like, oh, I never saw the shadow again. But obviously the shadow's been following her all this time.
Yeah, technically, yeah. Not doing the weird stuff. But what do you think about that? Like about that kind of story where you have a shadow that literally comes off the wall at you, touches you.
Part of me, the rational side to me says that it was the 70s. The mom was putting curlers in the girl's hair. And I remember how my sister used to react to that. It may have been a concussion after the mom got a little frustrated.
You think the mom was like beating the hell out of the hair? Like, come on, girl, curl.
That's how they rolled back in the 70s.
Literally, that's how they rolled.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think it's kind of like, I mean, kids, obviously they have active imaginations, right? But there's also a lot of stories of kids relaying things that they saw where you're like, okay, even if I saw that as an adult, I would lose my mind.
I don't know how kids do it sometimes.
Yeah. It's like similar to how you saw the devil or whatever pop out of your floor when you were a kid. This person saw a random shadow, their shadow, come off the wall and interact with them and do weird shit that you definitely don't ever want a shadow to do.
With all the research we do, and we come across a lot of Native American myths and stories, and you don't interact with that kind of stuff.
Exactly. But in that situation, how do you not interact with it? You just kind of turn around like, well, I don't want to look at you.
You just pretend you don't see it. You know it's there, but it doesn't have power over you until you give it power. So maybe it's something like that. Maybe once she interacted with it or let it know she was watching, it's like, oh, I got her.
That's creepy. That's really creepy, though. I mean, the door rattling and shaking and stuff like that is creepy too, because you hear about that with a lot of like poltergeist activity. Right. But I don't know, that shadow thing, especially because it only happened once, and that's got to like sit with you for the rest of your life. You're like, okay, what the hell happened that day?
Even if you rationalize it as your kid's mind working the way kids' minds work, some of those things back that I can remember that were spooky when I was a kid, they're still with me. And I'm not, me, I don't believe a lot of that stuff, but I remember those moments.
Yeah, pretty vividly.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing. Like, I can't remember what I did last week, but I can remember almost every single weird paranormal experience I had in vivid detail.
Yeah, I can remember all 2 or 3 of them. So there weren't that many for me, but I remember the ones I thought were kind of paranormal-ish.
Yeah, just having the ability to like recall every vivid detail of something that happened, 15, 20 years ago, and then not being able to remember, did I start the laundry? Did I not start the laundry? I'm going to go down and check for the 12th time in the last hour.
Well, there is a cause for loss of short-term memory.
Birth of a child.
Yes, that's part of it.
Hey, I'm taking my vitamins now, man.
About time.
Take your vitamins, people. I only took them for 1 day, so nothing has shown any effect yet. But if it does work, believe you me, I'm going to come talk about it. Because that's what our listeners come to hear is stories about ghosts and Scott's vitamin routine.
We didn't just tell a story about a ghost, though. This was an early iteration of the Shadow Man. And I do have a theory about the door rattling.
What's that?
The shadow got lost in the house, got locked in the cellar.
Like dark. Let me out. It's dark in here.
Yeah. I can't see my shadow.
Classic.